So just a real quick brief.
Flat style, keep it simple. Now when I trim clean.
There you go.
Thank you. Just real quick, talk about the Pulse survey. It's a recent thing that got started at the Census Bureau, and in fact is really a response to the pandemic. You know, one of the things that we've all had trouble initially, we were all worried about small businesses closing and how many of them were closing, and the data for businesses, you know, I like to in the industry we like to call them births and deaths of businesses. Of them going out usually takes the IRS about 18 months to declare a business is actually shut down as having no activity. And so it was way too late. And so the Census Bureau started these pulse surveys to keep a handle on that. And I think we have 3 speakers today from the Census Bureau. We have Kathryn Bonney, Colin Shevlin, and Jason Fields, who have all been working with the pulse survey data. And I'm going to turn this over to Kathryn.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Kathy Bonney. I'm the project manager for the Small Business Pulse Survey. And as Suzanne mentioned, I have with me Colin Shevlin, our lead data analyst, and Jason Fields, who works on the Household Pulse in the Demographic Directorate. Thanks for having us today, and feel free to ask questions as we go. Okay. So I was messing with this slide a little bit earlier and didn't finish. So the Household Pulse is over here on the right side and Small Business Pulse is on the left. For the most part, I'm just going to cover Small Business Pulse Survey and leave the Household Pulse content to Jason. So as Suzanne mentioned, the Small Business Pulse Survey was launched in reaction to the pandemic to gauge how small businesses were reacting to the pandemic. And we started data collection in April 2020, so April 26, 2020, and data collection is still ongoing. We're on our 7th phase. I'll get into the timing of that a little bit later. So here's who we've partnered with along the way for startup, and for each phase we consult with federal agencies, other data users to assist with content of interest, concepts, topics of interest, etc. So created a lot of good relationships in providing data products of use for these agencies. Okay, so let's see, what didn't I cover? So the Small Business Pulse Survey, we were able to mobilize and operationalize this product quickly because we leveraged the existing business frame and infrastructure. And I already kind of touched on those other couple bullet points, partnered with subject matter experts at other federal agencies, and we continue to do so. So here's our timeline for the different phases. We run for 9 weeks on and then take a 4-week break, or some of the phases were about 5-week breaks, and then it rinse repeat, right? So we just started phase 7 on November 15th, and that will run through January the 16th. Last publication will be January 20th. So here's an infographic, might cover a little bit of what we just touched on, but I'm going to start in the upper left-hand corner. So the Small Business Pulse Survey is a weekly survey to measure the coronavirus pandemic on the small businesses. Each phase has had around 19 to 21 questions. Low burden from the respondents. It should take about 5 to 6 minutes to complete. It's subjective, discretionary questions for the most part. We do ask one like cash on hand question where maybe someone would have to reference their books, but overall they're like subjective questions, and Colin will go over in a later slide how the contents change throughout the phases. So we're currently collecting data on operational challenges, vaccine requirements, supply chain impacts, outlook and expectations. Again, we'll dive into how the contents kind of varied over time and what our core content will be later. So we kind of touched on who we've partnered with for this. So we'll go over to the methodology and collection up here on the right, top right. So in our sample, over the 9 weeks, about 1 million small businesses receive an invitation to participate in the Small Business Pulse Survey. Around 100,000 are sent each week. This is representative of 5.6 million small businesses in the frame. And so included in this in the sample are all single location businesses, also called single units, with 1 to 499 employees and 1,000 plus revenue. And we had to have an email address from them at that time. So we sent out an initial invitation on Monday, asking for a response by Thursday. We have a due date reminder sent on Wednesday, and then a final notice sent on the Friday. On Friday, we state in there that the company actually has until the end of the phase to respond. So down here in the bottom right part, we went from concept to data release in 39 days, back when we first launched in April of 2020. It's the first economic survey conducted solely by email. We have weekly data releases, provides national estimates as well as state, top 50 MSA, and some sector level detail. We use Centurion as the reporting instrument, which is our census standard instrument. We've had a response rate of averaging around 25%. Now I'm going to hand it over to Colin so he can dive into the data products available and some interesting data.
Thanks, Kathy. So with each weekly publication, we're providing data to our data users in two ways. The first being this highly interactive website with a bunch of data visualizations. Through these prepackaged charts and maps, users can quickly gain insights into the story that the data is telling from week to week. All of our data viz provide the ability to toggle between estimates at the national level or digging into NAICS sector, state, or MSA estimates. Next slide. Our visualization options include responses by geography and sector, where you can view how a single response category differs across both state and sector. Survey response detail, where you can view the distribution of response categories for a single question. Multiple response comparison scatter plot, which is going to allow the user to view correlations among response categories by state, sector, or MSA. The survey response weekly comparison chart shows the entire time series of estimates for a question, and the prior year comparison shows how an estimate has changed from the previous year. And if a user can't get to what they're looking for from our prepackaged visualizations, we also provide data files with even more granular estimates for download. So in addition to all the categories discussed before, we also provide data at the 3-digit subsector level and data by employment size and state by sector estimates. So now that we've talked a little bit about how we provide data to users, I wanted to dive into the content we collect and how it's changed over time to remain as relevant as possible. So over the course of the 7 phases, questions have fallen into a few high-level buckets. We have our overall effect of the pandemic on the business. We have operations questions asking about things like revenue and employment changes. In phase 4, we began asking about COVID-related requirements for employees to come to work that week. In phase 6, we introduced a set of questions to measure how various aspects of the business have changed from their pre-pandemic normals. And actually, this was expanded upon in phase 7, where we started asking about specific changes to business practices. We've asked a variety of questions about business finances, and we always finish up by asking questions related to the business's future outlook. I've put together a couple of slides highlighting a subset of the content, certainly not exhaustive, and I would really encourage everyone to head over to our website after the presentation to browse for themselves. But first up is our overall effect question, where we ask the business how it's been affected by the pandemic. Respondents choose from 5 answer categories ranging from large negative to large positive effect. And you can see here how the responses at the national level have shifted away from the large negative category since the first week of the survey. The next slide shows the types of insights users can gain when looking at more detailed sector estimates. So these charts show previous week changes in revenue and employment for both businesses in Sector 72, which is accommodations and food services, and Sector 52, finance and insurance. Clearly, the pandemic's not having a uniform effect across all sectors. And while we just saw the benefit of comparing sectors, users can do a similar analysis by comparing responses by state. I mentioned before that in phase 4, we started asking if businesses required their employees to test negative for COVID or be vaccinated before coming into work that week. And here's a side-by-side comparison of how responses shifted for both New York on the left and Texas on the right. Again, we see that responses are not a monolith. I mentioned that in phase 6, we started asking about changes from pre-pandemic normals. And, I think that these data are super interesting, and this chart shows the responses at the national level. So what really jumps out to me is the decrease in employees and an increase in the prices that a business pays. And our new question in phase 7 asks businesses if they've adopted a selection of new business practices compared to what was normal before the pandemic. On this slide, I've plotted these responses by employment size. So you can see that as business size increases, so too does the likelihood of adopting new business practices. In the first 3 phases, we asked businesses about their current availability of cash on hand. The question was then dropped for phases 4 through 6 and reintroduced in phase 7. So this chart is going to show how responses have changed from where we left off at the end of phase 3. And we're certainly seeing a significantly larger percent of businesses reporting having 3 or more months of cash on hand. So that's an encouraging trend. And finally, I wanted to touch on one of our questions about what the business expects to need in the next 6 months. It's really interesting here to see the shift over the course of survey phases. Increasingly, businesses are identifying finding new employees and alternative supply chains as immediate needs rather than things like obtaining financial assistance or increasing marketing. Thus far, we've just looked at our estimates for questions with non-numeric answers. We also provide indexes, which are used to create a numeric representation of one or more questions with non-numeric answers. So this table on the slide shows our 4 current indexes and the questions that contribute to each one. We have the overall sentiment index, which is going to assess just the overall effect of the pandemic on small businesses. The operational challenges index, which assesses the overall effect on business operations. Market challenges index, which assesses the tightness in business conditions, and the expected recovery index, which is going to summarize the length that businesses expect before they recover. And on the next slide, I have a time series plotted for the overall sentiment index, which should look pretty similar to the first diverging bar chart I showed, except it might be potentially easier to digest as it's just a single number representing the theme rather than a collection of estimates. And data users are always going to want more. And an extremely common refrain we hear is, this data is really great, but do you have anything by ownership characteristics? And I'm really proud of our team of economists and math stats that in response to these requests have put out a variety of research papers and data products. We now have small business pulse survey research estimate data by ownership characteristics, as well as rural and urban designation for phases 1 through 3. We have a research tab on the website now that houses all these papers and data products. And coming to the end of our small business pulse materials, but I wanted to touch on, some additional benefits to conducting a survey like this beyond just its COVID implications. We're also able to pick up effects from discrete events that might be missed by a monthly, quarterly, or certainly an annual survey. Consider the hurricane that hit Louisiana. We can see what's likely its effect show up in the operational challenges index, which is going to summarize, those revenue and employment type responses. So this really shows the promise of these high frequency weekly programs like this. And with that, that's all I have on the Small Business Pulse Survey. The next 2 slides have some additional resources like contact information and useful links on our website. And I can now pass it over to Jason to talk about the Household Pulse Survey.
All right. Let me just go ahead and share my screen. Let's make sure everybody can see it. Can y'all see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so yep, as Colin said, I'm Jason Fields, and this is a little bit about the Household Pulse Survey. And of course, my disclaimer is anything I say or my opinions and conclusions are mine, not those of the Census Bureau's. There's, I'm trying to read that. Okay, so there's the same background, right? Affected the household side and the rest of the demographic area of the Census Bureau as it impacted the econ side. In February of 2020, we were all thinking about Census 2020 and upcoming Census Day on April 1st. We were worried about declining response rates in our household surveys and maintaining data quality and reducing bias, looking at how we could use administrative records and adaptive design, developing small area estimates, and of course, continuing to research and develop disclosure protection methods. We still are doing all of those things. However, in March, as you know, all of our in-person data collection stopped, our mail center closed, our telephone center closed, field interviewers shifted to calling people from their homes, and we worked really hard at getting them some phone numbers, and all of us shifted to full-time telework. In addition to what I'm going to tell you for the Household Pulse, I don't want you to think that that's all that was going on. Most of the major household surveys had some content changes that were instituted as rapidly as possible during this time. So we added questions to CPS and to SIP, and several of our sponsored surveys also changed their content to collect additional data for the pandemic. This screen, there we go. All right, so the Household Pulse. Given the situation and the inability to collect data in any of our traditional means, we really needed to come up with something different. And in a balance between risk and reward, we had no data. So there was, a high reward for taking the risk of developing the Household Pulse. Several other federal agencies were also at the same time kind of having the same thoughts and the same discussions. How do we collect and get some information about all of this really crazy stuff that's going on in people's households? And we wanted to make sure, unlike, other external non-federal data, that we provide as much transparency in what we did and the quality of the data as possible. That said, we still qualify the Household Pulse as an experimental data collection. It is a proof of concept. In doing this, we accepted that these were new methods, that we were not going to have the same data quality as we do with our traditional household surveys. And I did see somebody's hand raised. I'm okay if you want to ask questions on something I'm talking about. So I don't know if they're still up or if somebody else is watching that. Okay.
I'm watching it, so if I see something, I'll let you know.
Okay, then I'm going to just keep going. So one of the innovations that let us move ahead with the Household Pulse survey was the combination of our address frame, which is the source of all of the household addresses that we interview in our regular household surveys. So that's the darker blue in behind. So about 145 million addresses. And these numbers that I'm now going to show you on front, I need to update these with our current, but at the beginning of the pandemic, we had access to the contact frame, which is a frame that we've created at Census based on privately sourced, purchased data with emails and phone numbers, as well as information that comes back in our household data collections. So in this contact frame, we have about 75% of the master address file addresses have at least one email, and about 62% have at least one cell phone number. And those combined at the beginning of the pandemic to be about 81% of all of the addresses. Now, this stuff gets updated fairly regularly, so about once a quarter or so. And at this point today, we're covering about 86% of the addresses in the master address file. So being able to reach people by email and cell phone let us go ahead with this project. We, as with the Small Business Pulse, have had numerous federal partners and several phases of data collection. In phase one, we were collecting data once every week for about 6 days, and then take a day off, and then start collecting again. We did 12 rounds of data collection like that, and had 5 federal partners plus the Office of Management and Budget, and that survey was about 11 minutes long. And I should note that all of the content that we were able to develop and to get these instruments put together in the very short time between March 13th and April 23rd really relied on the work of the folks in the Census, cognitive labs, testing labs, as well as in the National Center for Health Statistics and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So the other agencies quickly kind of pulled all of their content together. We got a basic instrument up and running very, very fast. Over the course of the pandemic, we've had multiple phases. The instrument was evolved to be a 13-day data collection. So 2 weeks on, a day off, and then another 2 weeks on. And that carried through what we called phase 3.2 here out at the end of October. The content expanded to about 20 minutes worth of content, and the agencies we serve expanded significantly as well. So you can see all of the federal agencies that were involved in requesting and getting content on the survey. We are hopefully, we've just gotten approval, and we'll be starting phase 3.3 tomorrow with approximately the same amount of content and a slightly different data collection cycle. But everything came together with a revised contract with the software and OMB approval so that we can start tomorrow. Okay. So a real quick glance through our data collections from all of those phases that I showed you. We have, in addition to changing the length of the cycle, we changed from having a kind of a quasi-longitudinal component where we re-interviewed households, which really reduced response rates because after people answered it once, they really didn't answer it again. To households being interviewed, like I said, for 13 days and included only for one cycle at a time, and then a whole new sample of households for the next cycle. And we are currently in a pause, as I said, until tomorrow. But as of the end of that pause, we had sampled about 42.2 million sampled units and collected about 3.2 million interviews. The contents that these agencies have put together for us and with us span the basics of kind of, household necessities. So employment, sources of income, interruptions of income, and looking at essential worker occupations. Food security, the USDA has content that they've had on since the beginning on food sufficiency. The National Center for Health Statistics, the CDC, and the Maternal and Child Health Bureau have given us health questions that span mental health, vaccinations, telehealth and video health, and children's preventive health care. HUD and the Consumer Finance Protection Board and the Energy Information Administration have pulled together content that is what is our housing content. And it includes everything from, the basics of, rent status, to confidence in paying next month's rent or mortgage, eviction and foreclosure expectations, energy assistance use and rental assistance use. And the National Center for Education Statistics has had sections on K through 12 and on post-secondary education. And they're actually in the process of working on a revision to this content. So they have a relatively small K to 12 section now, but that is expected to increase down the road. So quickly turning to some results. The Household Pulse gives you that glimpse into what was going on and why people were experiencing things the way they were. So this is a graph I pulled together from our SAS public use files, and this is the percent of men and women who were not working, and because of children's care arrangements, among those who were not retired and not out of labor force. So essentially, those who wanted to work and were not working for this reason. And you can see that over the course of the pandemic, women 25 to 44 years old is the light blue line, and have experienced a very high level of stepping out of the labor force for this reason, and that has not tailed off. They're still there. And for men, it was higher than it might otherwise seem to have been, but much lower than for women, and fairly stable relationships across the pandemic. And just as a quick note, I do show the break between phases here as a space. You can see that the lines roughly line up, but it is a bit of a break in series every time we change the instrument. So those adults, this is a figure of adults expecting losses of employment income, and you can see how high it was at the beginning of the pandemic, both for men and women of 25 to 44, and for those 45 to 64. That the expectation that someone in the household would lose employment income was very high, remained high, had a little bit of a dip during this period of time during the fall of 2020, but as we got towards the winter, it rose again dramatically, but has then since fallen. This is one of the most significant things I feel about the household impact for the COVID-19 pandemic has been the impact to mental health. And these are measures that came from the National Health Interview Survey. We took two of 6 measures of depression and 2 of 6 measures of anxiety that they use in their National Health Interview Survey and have them included in the Household Pulse. And you can see the very, very, high levels, over 25% of the population feeling anxious, and similarly, loss of interest, worry in all households, and feeling down and depressed. This compares to what it was here. I put in the bottom right-hand corner, the National Health Interview Survey showed that from January to June of 2019, the levels for anxiety were at about 8.2% for adults in the country, and depression was at about 6.6%. So these estimates are much higher than what we had been seeing before the pandemic. Okay, so how do you get the data? So we have a nice little experimental household pulse data website, and we have prepared data tables as well as public use files, which are like the ones that I use to make those figures. We have an interactive data tool that will help you drill down, and a couple of data visualizations. Right, this is a little bit of an older picture. It has just the COVID-19 vaccination tracker. I have to update this because we also have a visualization for sexual orientation and gender identity. much like the household, the business pulse, we have a series of analyses that our analysts have pulled together, and most frequently they've been released through the America Counts stories. So I would encourage you to go to the America Counts series and take a look at those. This is an example of what our data tables look like. This happens to be Health Table 4, which has some additional information on mental health services. The tabs across the bottom include state geographies, and then the 15 largest metropolitan statistical areas. And a standard set of characteristics is shown on the left side. These are showing counts of people. We also have companion tables which show the standard errors for every one of these cells. So you can go ahead and calculate appropriate confidence intervals around whatever percentage it is that you are working with. Our interactive tool has a set of drop downs that expand, and you can pick a different estimate and see what weeks it's available from. When you look at the interactive tool, you can get you will get a map on the upper left and a bar chart on the upper right and a table down in the center. And the table you can download into Excel or CSV. And the table you can drill in and change geography. You can look at a specific state. You can change the states to metro areas. Our bar chart does show the confidence intervals, so you can have information on the margins of error. And let me jump. Okay, so that's pretty much it in terms of the data that we have and how you can access it. So in summary, kind of the household pulse is really a reaction to a complete and total disruption of our information systems to get us something to fulfill a gap. However, all of those data systems are now up and running, but we're still doing the household pulse because what it kind of told us is there was a demand and a need for rapid information, and that's where we've gone with the household pulse, and to continue to provide information at small areas and incorporate administrative data and adaptive design to help ensure that we're providing high quality data. And as with the Small Business Pulse, here's a set of links, including a link to the National Center for Health Statistics, which has their own data tool based on the household pulse and focusing on mental health and health insurance. That's it. There you go.
Excellent. Thank you very much. You know, I actually, two things. One, my husband got one of the emails and said,
Excellent.
"Is this really from the Census Bureau?" And I said, "Fill it." Fill
It
it out.
really is.
And then I was over his shoulder. I was told, "No, don't put that. Put this in there." He's like, "No, I'm answering it because it was sent to me."
Yep, that's absolutely right.
So that was fun. But the other thing is I actually have used the household pulse survey to look at, for some of my customers, to look at housing scarcity or,
Yeah.
you know, insecurity. And that has been very helpful. So I'm going to throw this open. If anybody in the audience here, if you have a question about the pulse surveys or if you've used it, please chime in. Let's see, we do have a question from Michael here. Have you looked at using samples from NIH's and all of the U.S. programs?
So we are working with the CDC, and we are using the samples from our sampling frame in order to be able to represent back to all households in the country and then all people. So I will take a look at the All of Us program. It's not something that CDC has mentioned to us in terms of something they want to try and integrate. We do have different projects where we have provided we've done stuff for different samples, but for the household pulse, we've stayed with the math-based contact frame sampling. I just saw questions are popping up, so I'm trying to read them while I'm talking, which is terribly hard for me.
Well, I can read them to you if that is helpful.
Well, there we go. So I see Scott's question about the possibility of another surge due to Omicron, and having the pulse continue beyond its now set closure of January. So I think we are expecting it to have a phase 3.4. We are talking to all of the federal agencies that are involved about content, and certainly, you know, the possibility of another surge is on everybody's mind in terms of the content change. Is matching? It is matching. Oh, right on. Yes, about the NIH study. Yeah, so we would have to talk to them, and maybe there's a project that we could do with them. It would probably be a restricted access project to match to those data or to sample from them. Jacqueline is asking, I know you have weights, but how representative is the data at smaller geographies? Can it be used at the county level or smaller within New Mexico? So the answer is definitely have to use weights, but no, it is not designed to provide county level estimates. I have used it to do some work where I've pooled multiple cycles together in order to get better estimates for small population areas, and to add characteristics. So I've added some county level characteristics to the file to look at, this was a project looking at food sufficiency with a county level variable for rural urban status. So you can do things like that. That has to be done in the context of our research data centers, sorry. And same question is about MSAs in New Mexico. So we've limited to the top 15 in terms of population size, the top 15 largest MSAs. I know the Small Business Pulse, I think, goes down to 50, the top 50 MSAs. Yep.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And so for the household side, we really don't think that it's robust enough to measure below for smaller MSAs. But that said, we are talking about a revision to the design where we can integrate small area estimates for certain topics. So if you have a specific topic, like, you know, for example, mental health, that you think a county level or sub-county level information would be useful, that's the kind of thing that I think the National Center for Health Statistics and us would be interested in hearing about.
Well, I'm not seeing anything new come out. I want to thank all three of you, Kathryn and Colin and Jason. You know, we have a tradition here in New Mexico that when I have you guys come and speak, I always take the speakers out in the evenings to our fine eating restaurants. And I'm missing that because you guys would be new volunteers for this culinary fun that we would have.
That would be awesome.
So we'll have
You're
to.
not victims, believe me, having been there. She takes you to the finest places.
Excellent.
We have a lot of good spots. Anyways, I want to thank you guys for speaking. And Barb, I think we can go ahead and stop recording this. For